Same-sex friendships. When we develop deep relationships within our own gender, we must always keep these relationships morally pure. Here's Gene Getz.
This principle is very, very important in the light of today's cultural and sexual values. Most of us know the direction of our society, the direction really of world culture in some respects. And the principle actually grows out of the relationship between David and his very dear friend, Jonathan. And in the continuation of David's lament here in the first chapter, after he heard about Saul's death on Mount Gilboa, he heard about Jonathan's death, he was in deep grief, particularly over his friendship with Jonathan, his dear friend Jonathan. And this is what we read in 2 Samuel 1:25 through 26. How the mighty have fallen in the thick of battle. Jonathan lies slain on your heights. I grieve for you, Jonathan, my brother. You were such a friend to me. Your love for me was more wonderful than the love of women. Now, you can see what those who want to promote an alternative lifestyle involving homosexuality, you can see how they would take this text. How they would use this text to try to communicate that, see, here in the Bible, even with David and Jonathan, there was a homosexual relationship. Now, on the surface, it may look that way. It may even sound that way, but the fact is, if you look at the total context of Scripture and the immediate context of that relationship, there's no way that this was a homosexual relationship. First of all, it would be a flagrant violation of God's law. And God would not allow them to be able to get by with that, just as he did not allow David later on to get by with committing adultery. In fact, in Leviticus 18:22, it's so specific. You are not to sleep with a man as with a woman. It is detestable. Now, that's a non-negotiable statement. And Paul underscored it when we come to the New Testament, when he said this is why God delivered them over to degrading passions. And there he's talking about homosexual relationships. For even their females exchanged natural sexual relations for unnatural ones. The males in the same way also left natural relations with females and were inflamed in their lust for one another. Very clearly, we cannot make the Bible teach that homosexuality is approved as far as God's will is concerned. And it's amazing how those who say they believe the Bible try to take passages like this out of context to support that lifestyle. In other words, you can make the Bible teach about anything you want if you take it out of context. And so here we have a statement that could be and is misinterpreted. But what does David mean? What does he actually mean when he says this? Well, basically, what he's dealing with is Jonathan's deep loyalty regardless of Saul's attempts on his life. And if you go back and trace that relationship, you'll see several things. Number one is Jonathan honored David above himself. And there, if you go back to that passage in 1 Samuel 18:4, it says that Jonathan loved David as much as he loved himself, so much so, and this was following the victory over Goliath, so much so that he actually took off his royal robe and he gave it to David, which was unbelievable. Little shepherd boy, and here is the son of the king giving him his robe. He gave him his warrior tunic. He gave him his sword. He gave him his bow. He gave him his belt. This is how much he loved David as a friend. Secondly, Jonathan served as a faithful intercessor. He was devoted to David. He did everything he could to help David build a relationship with Saul. Actually, Saul ordered Jonathan to kill David at one point in time. And Jonathan said, no, I can't do that. In fact, he went to David and said, my father is out to kill you. He wants me to kill you. You need to go. They developed a plan. And He went to his father and he spoke well of him, in spite of the fact that it angered his father terribly. And that leads to another observation, and that is that Jonathan continued to be faithful to David no matter what it cost him personally. In fact, his life was in jeopardy when he tried to defend David's absence. And if you go back to that story, there was an empty chair at the meal at Saul's table. And Saul said, "Where's David?" Now, at that point in time, he hated David. And Jonathan made an excuse for him. And he made another excuse because David was not there, because he was afraid. His life had been threatened. To come to that meal would be setting himself up to be murdered, to be taken out, to be killed. And Jonathan made an excuse for him. And it made his father so angry that Saul took a spear and tried to kill his own son. I mean, that's the intensity of the hatred. And there we see Jonathan coming to his defense. And all through that relationship, Jonathan put himself in a position to pay a horrible price because of his friendship with David. And so basically, what we have here is a relationship that Paul said, that David said, a relationship that David said was, I've never had this kind of loyalty on the part of anybody, including women. And of course, women would not have been in the position to do what Jonathan did. In fact, there were women that literally, including his own wife, Michal, who turned against him. You know, the woman that said she loved him, which was Saul's daughter, literally later on turned against David. And so he knew what it was to be betrayed even by his own wife. And so he said, Jonathan was a loyal friend. I've never experienced anything like it. And that's why he grieved so much. So what does this Old Testament story teach us? I believe it teaches us that both men and women can have deep and loyal relationships within their own genders that are not sexual. We know that's true as being part of the body of Jesus Christ and the relationships we can have within the body of Jesus Christ. In fact, we even see this kind of relationship between Jesus and John, the Apostle John. We read in John 21:20, so Peter turned around and saw the disciple Jesus loved following them. Now, in his humanity, Jesus was not showing favoritism. He just had a deep relationship with the Apostle John. And throughout the Gospel of John, which John wrote, he referred to himself as the disciple that Jesus loved in a unique and special way. They had a unique friendship. That disciple was the one who had leaned back against Jesus at the supper and asked, Lord, who is the one that's going to betray you? He's right there next to Jesus, leaning back against Jesus and asking him that question. Of course, John at that point did not understand. So we see this principle illustrated even in the life of Jesus. And in his humanity, he had a unique relationship with John, a friendship. So the reflection and response question is, how can husbands and wives have deep relationships with their own genders without creating tensions and even jealousy within their God-ordained marital relationships? And let me just speak to that for a few moments in terms of the practical aspects of that. Number one, I think it's very biblical. Men need men, and women need women in a very unique way. And we see that illustrated in the New Testament. We see it illustrated on Paul's missionary journeys, in his relationship with Barnabas, with his relationship with Silas, his relationship with Timothy, as they traveled together. They were friends as well as missionary companions. And in a sense, sometimes they were even willing to die for each other. This is the kind of relationship that they had. Women need women. In fact, Paul wrote to Titus and said that older women are to teach younger women to love their husbands, to love their children, to be pure. Women need women. God has designed this. We need each other for accountability. There are relationships that we have with other men as men that are unique in terms of accountability. There are relationships between women and women for accountability. And in some instances, those accountability situations would not be even appropriate between men and women. And so God has designed this as a unique aspect of our lives. Now, the other side of that is that we must avoid being possessive, which is a reflection of immaturity. We can become possessive, we can become jealous of relationships, and obviously, as husbands and wives, we need to realize that there is a place for friendships outside of the marriage relationship itself. Women with women, men with men. But here's the point I think we need to keep in mind in this principle, and that is that same-gender relationships should never be a priority over our marital relationships. Those marital relationships are priority. And if we make other relationships a priority over those relationships, then there is a cause for being disturbed and even jealous of those relationships. This can create jealousy. This can create insecurity. And I've seen this happen. I've seen this happen, and this is a reflection of immaturity on the part of a man or a woman to create this kind of jealousy. So having a deep relationship with another man or men should make both of them better husbands and fathers. That's a key. I know that's been my experience. Been in my experience with my elders that I've led with over the years. Have made me a better father, better husband, because of their model to me. And so, for women, having a deep relationship with another woman or women should make both of them, on both sides, better wives and mothers. And I know my own wife could testify to this. But you see, there is this principle, and that is that these relationships they must always be morally pure. And I believe that's the kind of relationship we see between David and Jonathan.